I hate to say this as an American, George, but we're the bad guys. We're not the good guys. We don't bring anything good to this world today. Nothing. When he reached over to open up and peek into Xi Jinping's notebook, which was clearly a setup to test the integrity of a man who failed the test egregiously, it proves that China can't trust him. And, Donald Trump likes to think of himself as the man of gold, the Midas touch. But you do know that the Midas touch was a curse, that everything he touched died. Because when you turn it to gold, it loses life. Donald Trump doesn't recognize that. Everything he touches dies. And the Russians and the Chinese know that.
Well, there's nothing Scott Ritter, former Marine Corps intelligence officer and later arms inspector for the United Nations, with whom I have worked for more than 20 years, and it's 21 years today since my appearance in the US Senate. Perhaps we'll find time to talk about that later. But Scott Ritter has forgotten more about war and the politics of war, the morality of war, than today's US politicians have ever known. That's why he's indispensable, literally indispensable. Scott Ritter, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. It's difficult to know where to start. Can we start in the Gulf, where Donald Trump just threatened the existential wipeout of 93 million Iranians? I made the point earlier that it doesn't make it less of a war crime that he's not actually able to carry that out, and that it is mere braggadocio. Do you share that view?
Absolutely. First of all, I think the name you were looking for is Joe Wolcott, and for Rocky Marciano.
No, it was
or Joe Lewis also.
Somebody even. No, they were great fighters. It was some pudding. It'll come back to me, Scott. I never normally forget.
But the best
fight
comparison would, of course, be George Galloway and Norm Coleman. That was a knockout. I mean, it was just a pitiful knockout. So maybe that's a more apt comparison, is George Galloway versus Norm Coleman, United States Senate.
More up to date.
Yeah.
21 years ago.
Sorry, I just look. I look at that video in amazement for several reasons. One, your mastery of the English language continues to intimidate me. I'm a Marine who barely can speak American English, and you just went up there and you were a swordsman. You literally sliced and diced him. Two, it was amazing how handsome you were back then, George. I mean, you're still a good-looking guy, but you cut quite the scene. So
all things must pass. I'm going the way of all flesh, Scott.
Me too. But to answer your question, I apologize for the levity, because now we're going to get serious. It is of course a war crime, a crime against humanity, a violation of international humanitarian law to articulate a threat against a people, to articulate a threat of genocide. And you're right. It doesn't matter that the president can't carry it out. What matters is that, this is the kind of thought process that crosses his mind. The Sergei Lavrov has said for some time now that, the United States government, and this goes back to arguments he articulated during the presidency of Joe Biden, that the United States is agreement incapable. We are incapable of agreements. But for Joe Biden, it was just because, we had taken a stance against Russia that made it impossible for us to have negotiated settlements with Russia. With Donald Trump, it's just he's a liar, a cheat, a thief. He's a man who has no honor and integrity. I mean, you talk about the showdown in China. When he reached over to open up and peek into Xi Jinping's notebook, which was clearly a setup to test the integrity of a man who failed the test egregiously, it proves that China can't trust him, and nobody can trust him. He is agreement incapable, and this is why he has to articulate these threats, because he doesn't know how to conduct diplomacy in the normal way. I'm not claiming to have anything over anybody, but the solution to this problem that exists between the United States and Iran is so easily solved. if one simply just applies themselves to the problem. And it can be solved in a way that addresses Donald Trump's biggest problem, which isn't the national security of the United States or of the region, but his political problems here at home, how to spin defeat into a political victory. There is a path for Donald Trump in this direction, primarily because the American public is so stupid that they won't understand that it's just a fraud, a sham, a put on to begin with, because they voted for a man who literally is a fraud, a sham, a put on.
Indeed. By the way, it was Don Cockell, the horizontal chump that Marciano demolished. I told you he was worse than any of those that we mentioned. But talking of mismatches, here we have in Russia nuclear-armed, hypersonically armed superpower being confronted on the face of it with conventional armed force, albeit 27 countries are involved in the aggression against the Russian people of the east of Ukraine to start with, and now the people of Russia itself. I said earlier, and the last time I spoke to people in Moscow about this, about pressure on Putin, everybody said the only pressure on Putin is why the hell he doesn't finish this once and for all now, so that our sons don't have to go and fight it again in 10 or 15 years' time. After a 500 drone broadside overnight, hitting the airport, killing civilians in high-rise flats, the truth is Russia's going to have to take the kid gloves off, isn't it?
Well, this is the big discussion that's taking place now. I think we do need to understand that, this conflict between Russia and Ukraine isn't just a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It's a conflict between Russia and the collective West, which means that Vladimir Putin's strategic approach to managing this conflict goes far beyond simply fighting a war of attrition on the, on the battlefield against the Ukrainian / Western military. He has to take into account the geopolitics of the region, of the world. He has to take into account the economies of the world and the Russian economy, most importantly. So everything has to be managed, which means he's very pragmatic. And he has a path to victory, toward victory. He has defined what victory is, and he has said that we will achieve this victory. He's not looking at the calendar because the way he had managed this problem never once did any of these issues, which are admittedly politically embarrassing at times for Russian leadership, but they never manifested themselves in an existential fashion, meaning Russia never really had a real reason to deviate its course. Vladimir Putin's shoulders are big enough to handle, Zelensky telling bad jokes and people in the Twitter sphere saying that Russia's weak. Putin knows exactly who he is, what he is, and where he is and where he's going. And I think when you and I were there in October, that was the reality. That reality has changed, unfortunately. Today we have Europe providing Ukraine with long-range strike capacity, the very kind of capacity that Russia put the United States on notice in January of 2022, Russia will not tolerate at all. That is, they said, we will not allow NATO missiles on Ukrainian soil that can strike into the Russian depth. Well, today we have NATO missiles on Ukrainian soil striking into the Russian depth. The Flamingo, the FP5, is a British-made missile using German guidance equipment brought to their target by American and NATO intelligence. Without this, Ukraine would not have this weapon. Ukraine's other weapons are using corridors that go through Poland into the Baltic so they can strike in the vicinity of St. Petersburg, or through Kazakhstan so they can strike into the strategic depth. In November, I spoke with a member of the State Duma on a committee that deals with, energy infrastructure security in the face of the drone threat. And at that time, he said that the drone attacks were little more than political nuisance. They had a dramatic explosion, but at the end of the day, the Russians were able to contain the damage, repair the damage, and get the unit in question back up to speed. So there was never really a major disruption in Russia's number one breadwinner, which is their energy infrastructure. Today, that has changed. By some estimates, up to 20% of Russia's export potential has been damaged to the point that it's not being brought back up to speed. And if the Ukrainians continue to do this, we are talking about economic damage of an existential nature. This is why this past victory day was different than any other victory day I've ever seen. The tone was much darker. The Russian government put the Ukrainians and the West on notice that if drones struck Moscow, Kiev would disappear. But now I believe that those threats still exist. And the reason why I believe that is, we have what I call, we have the Karaganov doctrine. Sergei Karaganov is a noted political scientist, a longtime advisor to Vladimir Putin. In 2023, and speaking about the war, he said that it's time for Russia to strike Europe directly, and that Russia should use its nuclear arsenal to send the message to Europe that you're playing with fire. He said he didn't believe that the United States would trade Boston for Poznan, meaning that if Russia put a nuclear weapon into Poznan, a polar city, that the United States wouldn't do anything, wouldn't commit suicide over this point. Vladimir Putin responded, "That's not my doctrine. I don't agree with Sergei Karaganov." That was in 2023. In 2024, though, Vladimir Putin brought Sergei Karaganov in to advise on how to reformulate Russia's strategic posture, nuclear deterrence posture. And in 2025, Russia issued a new nuclear doctrine that said the following: if nuclear-armed states provide conventional strike capacity to a non-nuclear state and use that to strike the strategic depth of Russia, Russia will have to use nuclear weapons preemptively against that threat. That is the exact scenario that exists today. The exact scenario. The Karaganov doctrine is alive and well and living and breathing. And if Europe doesn't understand how close they are to receiving a Russian nuclear weapon, they need to reformulate this. This is as serious as it gets. Read the Russian nuclear doctrine promulgated in the fall of 2025, and then read the lead up to it and understand what I'm talking about is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We are in a very dangerous situation. Ukraine is playing, there's the old Top Gun movie. I cite the original where, Maverick gets chewed out by the commander of the air group. Son, your mouth is writing checks your body can't cash. Well, here it's time to tell the world that Ukraine is writing checks that NATO and the United States can't cash, that Russia will execute its doctrine. They may not start off with nuclear weapons. In fact, I believe they won't. But, the Oreshnik missile has only been used singly. But it is known, based upon what the Russians have said and what intelligence implies, that if you use a massive erection, let's just call it a regiment's worth, 3 battalions, 3 missiles each, 9 missiles, striking Bankova, the district of Kiev, it will cease to exist, and the damage that will be done will mimic that of a nuclear weapon. And that's the fate that awaits Ukraine. That is the fate that awaits Germany, England, France, all of Europe. And also, we need to also point out that 2 days ago, Russia put 1,500 plus drones in the air over Ukraine. The reason why we're able to do that is Russia's producing over 1,000 drones a day. They've never used more than 600 of them. Normal rate of expenditure is 250 to 300 a day. That means they're banking away over 500 drones a day. They've been doing that now for more than 2 years. 500 times 600 gives you a hell of a lot of drones. Russia will be able to blacken the skies of Europe for 3 straight months with drones that Europe can't shoot down. This is the direction this conflict is going. And it's stupid because Vladimir Putin didn't go for the kill. You've spoken to the people that are frustrated. Why doesn't he go for the kill? Because that's not who he is, and that's not what Russia is. Russia is not the United States. Russia doesn't, do the things we do. But we have backed Russia into a corner so that it is now an existential question of survival. If Russia fails to take action, it's not embarrassing, it's fatal. And so Russia will take action, and I think it's going to be sooner rather than later. We have the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum convening in 2 weeks' time in St. Petersburg. And I can tell you that's a huge forum. You know what I'm talking about. It's bigger than the World Economic Forum. It's more important to tell the truth. If Ukraine puts a drone into that forum or threatens to put a drone in that forum, it's lights out for Ukraine and lights out for Europe. And the world needs to wake up to this fact. But sadly, the one power that could do something about this, the United States, is governed by a madman, a narcissist, who functions as a cult of personality, not as a chief executive. Your poll, yes, it's tongue in cheek who won the fight, but it's also reflective of the fact that Donald Trump has no respect of anybody in the world. He's not only agreement incapable, he's respect incapable. Nobody respects this man. And to be frank, getting back to your original question about Iran, nobody fears this man. Iran doesn't fear him. Iran knows the following, and it has been briefed to China and Russia, that if the United States attacks, the United Arab Emirates will cease to exist as a viable nation state. It's all over for the UAE. Kuwait may go that way. Bahrain may go that way. But at a minimum, the United Arab Emirates will be erased from the planet. They will have no fresh water, no ability to generate power, and they'll have no ability to generate gas or oil. They'll be bankrupt, they'll be thirsty, and they'll be baking in 54-degree temperature because there's no air conditioning. That's the end of two of the greatest cities in the Middle East, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They'll be gone, depopulated, along with the rest of that nation. And that's the fate of all other Gulf Arab states if they want to play this game. Iran is done playing games. They're done playing the game of escalation management. They will no longer match the escalation of others. If they are attacked, they're coming in with the knockout blow. This has been articulated by people that you respect like me. Professor Morandi has said these words, and others have said these words as well. And Israel, too, will pay a very heavy price. So American leadership is needed now more than ever, but we don't have a leader in Washington, D.C. We have a narcissist, a child, a man-child who thinks that, spouting threats of genocide somehow makes him a great man and makes America a great nation. It just shows the world actually how, meek, mild, and totally inconsequential the United States is. We like to brag that we are the exceptional nation, that the world can't live without us. Well, I will tell you right now, the world damn well could live without us because all we bring to the world today is trouble with a capital T.
Finally, Scott, on China. I'm right, Amintad, that he went with these made in China cap out, but he came back empty-handed. He achieved nothing except the further confirmation of all the things you've just said about himself personally, and by extension, the United States. Is that recognized in the U.S.? How are people viewing the summit?
Well, again, here's the problem, George, that the American people are as ignorant as the day is long about the world we live in. I mean, here we are, one of the most powerful nations in the world, and we're populated by people that know nothing about the world we live in. Nothing. The average American couldn't spell China, let alone point it out on a map. They couldn't tell you what the top 4 cities in China are, what their populations are, and what they produce. We know nothing about China except that just about everything that's on our shelves today says made in China, and we are prisoners because of our consumption, economy to China, but we don't even recognize that. One of the humiliating things is when he talks about he brought the greatest minds in the world, the greatest men, the greatest powers, and he named them off. They were sitting down at there was a young lady sitting there, and I can't remember her name, but she's the glass lady. She's the lady that at 15 years of age got kicked out of school, ended up having to work as a glass grinder. And then she was just innovative. Her parents lost their job. She had to step up. So she came up with a small business plan. She brought in her family. They started making glass. And then as things went on, she started bidding for bigger and bigger jobs. Everybody who has an iPhone today with this touch glass up here, that's her. She cornered the market. She invented this. She made this happen. She's doing that. That's one of the greatest people in the world today. Donald Trump doesn't even know her name, doesn't know what she did, and doesn't realize that when he brings American computer specialists, their computers don't work without her glass. Nothing works without what's inside. Nothing will work at all without the rare earth minerals that China now is holding back from the United States. Permanent magnets to make all of our weapons work, make everything work. China corners that market. Donald Trump didn't get any inroads in that. He humiliated himself. 200 Boeing aircraft, he said, we're going to sell. Well, I don't know. The last time Boeing talked to China about it was supposed to be 500, but we screwed that up with sanctions, tariffs, et cetera. And Boeing, and China went and bought Airbuses from France. Now, I haven't checked the latest in the list of Chinese aviation companies, but I don't imagine there's companies out there saying we still need some airplanes and we'll take some Boeings. President Trump talked about contracts, about 200. Boeing still doesn't know what he's talking about. There are no contracts. Trump has conversations with himself. He invents conversations. He invents facts. And Xi Jinping just has to sit there and look at him saying, what the hell are you doing? I mean, it had to be the greatest relief in the world to see Donald Trump get on an airplane and leave, because now they can get down to the serious business of managing the world, which, by the way, begins in a couple days when the other great leader of the world shows up in China, Vladimir Putin. You know, Xi Jinping didn't go out to meet Donald Trump when he came off the airplane. I could put the last dollar in my bank account on the fact that Xi Jinping will be there to greet Vladimir Putin, because they respect each other, they treasure each other's opinions, and they work in on the same side. Sadly, the United States is a friend to nobody. We're an embarrassment to everybody. And Russia and China have no choice but to come together. Despite all of our efforts to split them apart, we're not going to split them apart. Russia and China are joined, one, because they're neighbors. We tend to forget that fact. Two, because they have common interests that just are naturally occurring, that is derived from that neighbor status. But three, because we have driven them together with our irresponsible policies, our irrational action. We've driven Russia and China together to the point now that they have no choice but to work in, collusion against the United States, because we are the enemy. I hate to say this as an American, George, but we're the bad guys. We're not the good guys. We don't bring anything good to this world today. Nothing. I challenge anybody to tell me what we do that's good in the world today. We have, Donald Trump likes to think of himself as the man of gold, the Midas touch. But you do know that the Midas touch was a curse, that everything he touched died, because when you turn it to gold, it loses life. Donald Trump doesn't recognize that. Everything he touches dies. And the Russians and the Chinese know that.
And all that glisters is not gold, of course, and much of the glitter of the Trump presidency was never gold and looks distinctly lacking in luster today. I make one sojourn, if I may test your patience. Most people on this side of the Atlantic have no idea what's happening in Kentucky, where a single congressman in a small part of a small state of Kentucky has found himself at the center of the most extraordinary election there's ever been in the United States, where foreign interests, Israeli interests, let's call a spade, Israeli interests have poured tens of millions of dollars, unprecedented, into an election in a tiny area to beat a guy called Thomas Massey, who much of the world is asking, can you educate us what this is all about?
Well, the beauty of being from a small congressional district in Kentucky is that there aren't many moneyed interests that are pursuing you. You don't have big manufacturing plants. Pharmaceuticals aren't going in there. Nothing. You just have people, American people. And it's very interesting how when the American people are able to converse directly with a representative, how the representative suddenly finds a conscience, because he becomes the representative of the people. The American people are good people. I know I said that they're ignorant people, and they are. I wish we'd be smarter, but we are good people. We are fundamentally good people. You take a look at what we do every day, getting up, going to work, caring for our family, caring for our loved ones. We work harder than just about anybody out there, which is sort of frustrating because we don't show much for it, but we work very hard, and we love our family, and we want to do the right thing. Americans want to do the right thing. And they elected a representative, Thomas Massey, who said, I will represent you in Congress. And he did. And he doesn't play the game. So when he gets to Congress and he sees genocide taking place in Israel, because he hasn't taken AIPAC money, he's not going to close his eyes. When he gets to Congress, he sees waste, fraud, and abuse. He's going to call it out, because that's what his constituency demands of him, to call out this waste, fraud, and abuse. He's not there to play the big games of the corrupt politicians. He's there to represent the people of the United States of America in his little congressional district of Kentucky. And he does a damn good job. But because of this, he has become, because it's the exception to so much of what goes on in Washington, D.C., he stands out. And he has become symbolic of the conscience of America, that when Thomas Massey speaks, people listen because they realize this is a man without corruption, without vice of the normal congressional type. I mean, they are doing things right now, George, that are just unbelievable. They are attacking this man personally. You know, they're going after the memory of his dead wife. They're attacking, I mean, this just shows you how scumbag these people are. You know, Thomas Massey is a good man, an honorable man. Is he a perfect man? No man on this planet is perfect. That is just 100% absolute guarantee. But he is a good man, and he is a good representative of the people of Kentucky, and he would be a great representative of the people of the United States if he ever elevated himself to that direction. But they're trying to destroy him because they can't have a voice of conscience standing up and speaking out, especially now that people are listening to Thomas Massey. You know, there's that old E.F. Hutton commercial back in the late 1970s and 80s. When E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. When Thomas Massey speaks, everybody listens. And that's what makes him dangerous.